Chosen One. The story begins at a moment when the hidden dynamics surrounding your life are finally becoming visible. For a long time, you walked through a season filled with subtle pressure that was difficult to explain. Certain opportunities seemed to stall for reasons that made no sense. Conversations shifted strangely when you entered a room. People who once appeared friendly began acting distant or guarded without clear cause. At times, it felt as though an invisible current was working quietly against you, creating delays, misunderstandings, and emotional confusion that never fully revealed their origin. What once seemed like scattered obstacles is now understood as part of a deliberate pattern. Behind the scenes, two individuals had formed an alliance not out of truth or genuine connection, but out of shared insecurity and the desire to contain something about your presence that unsettled them. At the center of this dynamic stood a powerful contrast between appearance and reality. One person carried visible influence and charm, someone who moved easily through social spaces and maintained the image of confidence and control. Yet beneath that polished exterior lived a quieter truth, an inner emptiness and fear that could not be fully concealed. The other person recognized this vulnerability and attached themselves to it strategically, building their own sense of power through proximity and control. When your authenticity entered that environment, something unexpected happened. You never competed for attention or influence, yet your natural presence exposed the fragile structure holding their alliance together. What was genuine in you stirred curiosity and recognition in one of them, while awakening insecurity in the other. From that moment forward, their quiet alliance began shaping itself around a single objective, limiting the influence of a light they could not manipulate. Chosen One. This conflict was never truly about romance, popularity, or social rivalry. It was a deeper confrontation between authenticity and performance. Your presence made visible the difference between a life lived honestly and a relationship sustained by image, dependency, and silent control. The alliance responded with subtle forms of containment, whispered doubts, quiet sabotage, and efforts to keep you outside the circle they had constructed. Yet heaven allowed the situation to unfold only for a season. What was built on fear and strategy cannot endure indefinitely. The arrangement that once worked against you is now beginning to collapse under the weight of truth, and the connection they attempted to suppress is returning with a clarity they can no longer hide from. Chosen One. The moment when you first began sensing that something unusual was happening around you did not arrive with clear evidence or open confrontation. Instead, it appeared through subtle shifts that were difficult to explain at first. Conversations would change tone when you entered certain spaces. Opportunities that seemed almost certain would suddenly stall without visible cause. People who once showed warmth toward you would begin acting distant or guarded in ways that did not match the history you shared with them. At first, you may have tried to dismiss these changes as coincidence or misunderstanding, assuming that perhaps circumstances had simply shifted in ways you could not yet see. Yet over time, a quiet awareness began forming inside your spirit. Something about the resistance you were encountering did not feel random. This awareness grew gradually because the alliance working against you was never meant to be obvious. The two individuals involved did not stand openly together in opposition to your path. Their coordination operated quietly beneath the surface of ordinary interactions. Each of them played a different role in maintaining the situation, and the effectiveness of their efforts depended on remaining unnoticed. If their intentions had been exposed immediately, the entire structure would have collapsed. So they moved carefully, shaping circumstances in ways that appeared natural from the outside, while still producing the outcome they wanted. Chosen One. The first person in this alliance carried the kind of influence that tends to attract attention and respect in social environments. They possessed outward charm and a reputation that made others assume they were trustworthy or admirable. Their presence in a room often shaped the tone of conversations and decisions. Many people around them looked to them for guidance or approval. Because of this status, their words carried weight. When they expressed support for someone, doors opened. When they expressed doubt or hesitation, people tended to follow their lead without questioning it too deeply. Yet beneath that outward confidence existed something far more fragile than it appeared. Influence often creates the illusion of security, but it does not always heal the inner fears a person carries about themselves. The first person in this alliance lived with a quiet anxiety that their position might someday be threatened. They had built much of their identity around being admired, respected, and seen as important. Anything that introduced uncertainty into that image felt dangerous to them, even if the threat existed only in their imagination. Chosen One, the second person in this alliance, recognized that vulnerability quickly. While the first individual carried influence through status and reputation, the second operated through observation and calculation. They understood how social dynamics functioned. They knew how to identify the insecurities hidden beneath someone's public image. Instead of challenging those insecurities, they learned how to attach themselves to them. By reinforcing the first person's sense of importance and protecting their position, they gained influence of their own. Their role was quieter, but no less powerful. The partnership between them was therefore not rooted in genuine trust or shared purpose. It was built on mutual fear and dependency. The first person feared losing the admiration that sustained their identity. The second feared losing the proximity to power that gave them significance. As long as each person supported the other's insecurity, their alliance remained stable. Together, they created an environment where their positions remained unchallenged. Chosen One, your presence disrupted that arrangement without you even trying. You did not enter the situation with a plan to compete for attention or authority. In fact, the authenticity you carried often expressed itself through simplicity rather than ambition. You spoke honestly when others performed politeness. You acted with integrity, even when manipulation might have produced faster results. The calm confidence you carried did not come from external validation, but from alignment with something deeper within your spirit. That authenticity produced a powerful effect on the environment around you. People who encountered you often felt seen in ways they did not expect. Conversations with you tended to move beyond superficial topics and touch something more genuine. While some people welcomed that depth, others found it unsettling. Authenticity has a way of revealing the contrast between what is real and what is performed. For the first person in the alliance, your presence stirred something complicated. Part of them recognized the sincerity in you and felt drawn toward it. They sensed a depth that could not be manufactured through reputation or influence. Yet that same recognition also created discomfort. If others began noticing the authenticity you carried, it might shift the attention that had always been directed toward them. Instead of remaining the central figure in every environment, they might suddenly share that space with someone whose influence came from something more genuine than status. Chosen One, the second person in the alliance, noticed this tension immediately. Where the first person felt curiosity mixed with insecurity, the second saw a potential threat to the structure they had carefully maintained. If the authenticity you carried began attracting attention or admiration, it could weaken the dependency that kept their alliance intact. The balance of influence might change. The quiet authority you carried could expose the fragile foundation of the relationship they depended on. This realization became the moment when the alliance shifted from passive observation to quiet resistance. The two individuals did not confront you openly. Instead, they began adjusting their behavior in subtle ways, designed to limit your influence within their environment. Small changes began appearing. Invitations might not reach you when gatherings were organized. Conversations about your contributions might become quieter or less enthusiastic. Opportunities that once seemed possible would suddenly redirect toward others. Chosen One, none of these actions appeared dramatic on their own. Each one could easily be explained away as coincidence or misunderstanding. Yet together, they created a pattern that slowly reduced your presence within certain circles. The intention was not necessarily to destroy your reputation, but to keep you at a distance from spaces where your authenticity might disrupt the balance they depended on. What they did not fully understand was that the conflict they felt toward you was not truly about competition or personal disagreement. It came from the deeper tension between truth and performance. Your presence reminded them that authenticity cannot be manufactured through status or proximity to power. It arises from alignment with something genuine within the spirit. That reminder threatened the illusion they had spent so much time maintaining. Chosen One, this is why the alliance never felt peaceful, even when it appeared stable on the surface. Relationships built on fear require constant maintenance. Every new situation must be carefully managed to prevent exposure. The more your presence revealed the difference between authenticity and performance, the more energy the alliance had to invest in controlling the narrative around you. Yet, the same authenticity that unsettled them also became the force that would eventually unravel their partnership. Truth has a way of revealing itself gradually over time. People who observe genuine character consistently will eventually recognize it for what it is. No amount of quiet sabotage can permanently hide the contrast between integrity and manipulation. The Alliance believed they could maintain control by limiting your access to certain spaces, but they underestimated the resilience that authenticity carries. Influence built on truth does not depend on constant proximity or approval from those in power. It grows quietly, wherever people recognize sincerity and alignment. Chosen One, the conflict that began in that hidden alliance was never simply about two individuals trying to restrict your progress. It was the beginning of a larger revelation. Your presence exposed the fragile structure holding their relationship together. What looked like partnership from the outside was actually a system built on insecurity and fear. And once truth enters such a system, its stability begins to weaken. Chosen One, the period that followed the formation of that hidden alliance became one of the most confusing seasons of your life. Nothing dramatic announced the beginning of it. Instead, the atmosphere around you began shifting in quiet, subtle ways that were difficult to explain. Doors that once seemed open began closing without clear reason. Invitations disappeared. Conversations that had once carried warmth suddenly felt guarded or distant. Opportunities that looked promising would dissolve at the last moment, leaving you wondering what had changed behind the scenes. At first, you tried to approach these shifts with humility and patience. You questioned whether perhaps you had misunderstood something or misread the situation. When people around you began behaving differently, you examined your own actions to see whether you had unintentionally caused offense or confusion. This self-reflection came from your genuine desire to live with integrity. You wanted to remain open, teachable, and aware of how your presence affected others. Yet the deeper truth of that season was something you could not see clearly at the time. Hidden interference was shaping the environment around you. The Alliance, working quietly behind the scenes, did not need to attack you directly in order to affect your life. Instead, they influenced conversations, perceptions, and opportunities in subtle ways. When people spoke about you in private spaces, the tone of those discussions had already been shaped. When decisions were made about who should be included or excluded from certain circles, invisible suggestions had already been introduced. Chosen One, this kind of sabotage rarely appears dramatic enough to be easily proven. That is why it can create such deep emotional confusion for the person experiencing it. You felt the effects without always seeing the cause. The shifting atmosphere made you question your own perception of reality. At times, you wondered whether you were imagining the resistance around you. Other times, you believed perhaps it was simply a difficult season that would eventually pass. This confusion was part of the design. When interference remains hidden, it encourages self-doubt. If the person targeted begins questioning themselves instead of the environment around them, the sabotage becomes easier to sustain. The Alliance depended on you remaining unaware of what was truly happening. As long as you believed the difficulties were simply unfortunate circumstances, their influence could continue quietly shaping your path. But something unexpected happened during that season. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, you began adapting to it in ways the Alliance did not anticipate. Each time an opportunity closed, you turned inward and reflected more deeply on your purpose. Each time a relationship shifted unexpectedly, you brought your questions to prayer rather than reacting with bitterness or anger. Instead of becoming hardened by the confusion, you became more attentive to the guidance rising quietly within your spirit. Chosen one. Endurance has a way of transforming hardship into wisdom. The more obstacles appeared in your path, the more carefully you began observing the patterns around you. You started noticing that certain disruptions occurred at specific moments. Conversations carried subtle undertones that revealed more than their words alone suggested. Gradually, your discernment began sharpening. Prayer also became a deeper part of your life during this period. When answers were not visible in the external world, you sought clarity through spiritual alignment. Those quiet moments strengthened your connection to God and allowed insight to develop beneath the surface of everyday events. Over time, you began sensing the difference between genuine obstacles and interference designed to slow you down. Chosen one. What the Alliance intended as sabotage slowly became a training ground for spiritual maturity. Every challenge forced you to develop qualities that would later become essential to your calling. Patience replaced the need for immediate understanding. Discernment replaced blind trust. Emotional discipline replaced reactive frustration. Instead of weakening your spirit, the season refined it. The more you grew through these experiences, the more difficult it became for hidden interference to control your path. You were learning to move according to inner alignment rather than external approval. Even when doors closed, you continued developing your gifts and strengthening your character. The Alliance had hoped the obstacles would exhaust you. Instead, they produced resilience. Chosen one. While this transformation was unfolding within you, something equally significant was happening within the relationship between the two individuals who had formed the Alliance. At the beginning of their partnership, the structure between them seemed stable. Each person fulfilled a role that supported the other's insecurity. One carried status and influence, while the other reinforced that position through loyalty and strategic observation. Yet relationships built on fear and performance rarely remain stable forever. Over time, the tension created by maintaining appearances begins to surface. The Alliance had required constant management of perception. Conversations had to be carefully controlled. Situations had to be shaped so that the narrative surrounding you remained consistent with the story they had created. Chosen one. Truth has a quiet but persistent way of entering spaces where deception once operated comfortably. The person in the Alliance who carried influence began noticing subtle contradictions in the narrative that had been built around you. Your continued growth and stability did not match the image that had been quietly presented to them. When they observed your behavior directly, it did not reflect the suspicions that had been suggested in private conversations. At first, this realization appeared only as a faint sense of discomfort. They began wondering whether certain interpretations about you had been exaggerated or misrepresented. Small moments of clarity started appearing, times when your authenticity stood in obvious contrast to the doubts they had been encouraged to believe. Chosen one, this shift created tension within the Alliance itself. The second person who had helped construct the narrative against you sensed the change immediately. Their influence depended on maintaining control over how situations were interpreted. If the first person began questioning that narrative, the balance of power between them would weaken. Fear began replacing the confidence that once guided their actions. To maintain control, the second person became more aggressive in reinforcing the original story. They repeated the same warnings and suspicions with greater urgency. Yet this intensity had an unintended effect. Instead of strengthening the Alliance, it began revealing the insecurity behind it. The more desperately they tried to maintain the narrative, the more obvious their motives became. Subtle manipulations started appearing in ways that were harder to hide. Conversations that once seemed supportive began carrying undertones of control. The person with influence started noticing how frequently the second person positioned themselves as the interpreter of situations, shaping how events were understood. Chosen one. The relationship that once appeared stable began showing signs of fracture. Trust slowly eroded as doubts surfaced about the intentions behind certain actions. The person who once relied on the Alliance for reassurance started recognizing how much of their perception had been influenced by someone else's insecurity. As this awareness grew, tension within the relationship intensified. The second person sensed their influence slipping and responded with increasing desperation. The calm strategy they once used began giving way to emotional pressure and defensive behavior. Hidden motives that had been carefully concealed for so long started becoming visible. Chosen one. This is the moment when performance can no longer survive. Relationships built on image require constant agreement between the people maintaining them. Once truth begins entering the room, the illusion becomes difficult to sustain. The alliance had depended on shared secrecy and mutual reinforcement of fear. When that foundation began cracking, the entire structure started weakening. The person who once carried influence now faced a difficult realization. Much of what they believed about you had been shaped by someone else's agenda. This awareness created an internal conflict that could not easily be ignored. The more they observed your authenticity directly, the harder it became to reconcile that reality with the narrative they had accepted. Chosen one. The fracture within that relationship was not caused by your actions. It was the natural consequence of truth entering a space built on manipulation. What had once looked like unity between them began unraveling under the weight of honesty. The silent sabotage that once surrounded your life had unknowingly triggered the collapse of the very alliance that created it. Chosen one. The turning point in this story does not arrive through dramatic confrontation or public confession. It unfolds quietly within the mind and heart of the person who once participated in the hidden alliance against you. As the structure of that alliance begins to fracture, the person who carried influence finds themselves facing a realization that had long been buried beneath fear and convenience. For a long time, they had avoided looking too closely at what they truly felt when they encountered you. It was easier to accept the narrative that had been presented to them than to confront the deeper truth stirring beneath the surface of their own awareness. Yet once the tension inside their relationship began exposing the manipulations that surrounded them, something within them started to awaken. They began revisiting moments they had once dismissed as insignificant, conversations where your sincerity had disarmed them, instances where your calm presence had shifted the emotional atmosphere of a room, and times when your honesty had quietly challenged the carefully managed image they had built around themselves. These memories began returning not as distant recollections, but as living reminders that something real had once been present between you. Chosen one. Authenticity has a way of leaving an imprint on those who encounter it. Even when someone chooses to walk away from that truth, the memory of it remains somewhere within their spirit. The person who once participated in the sabotage slowly begins recognizing that the connection they felt with you was not ordinary. It carried a depth that could not easily be replaced or replicated. What they experienced in your presence had awakened a part of them that rarely surfaced in their carefully controlled world. This realization becomes uncomfortable because it forces them to confront the role fear played in their earlier decisions. At the time when the alliance formed, choosing comfort seemed easier than choosing truth. Accepting the narrative that portrayed you as a threat allowed them to protect their existing relationships and maintain the position they had become accustomed to holding. Aligning with the second person's perspective felt safer than examining the authenticity they sensed in you. Yet as time passes, that choice begins revealing its consequences. The relationship they relied on for reassurance no longer feels stable. The manipulation that once appeared helpful now looks controlling. The narrative that once seemed convincing begins showing cracks. With each passing moment, the contrast between what they experienced with you and what they continue experiencing within their current situation becomes clearer. Chosen one. This contrast slowly transforms you into a standard within their mind. They begin comparing every interaction in their life to the sincerity they once recognized in you. Conversations with others feel shallow by comparison. Affection that once seemed satisfying now appears rehearsed or conditional. The deeper emotional presence you carried becomes something they cannot easily find elsewhere. At first, they resist this realization. Human pride often tries to defend past decisions, even when the truth becomes visible. They may attempt to convince themselves that what they felt with you was temporary or exaggerated. They may try to focus on practical reasons why distancing themselves from you seemed necessary at the time. But the memory of authenticity does not fade easily. Chosen one, truth has a way of returning to the heart even after it has been dismissed by the mind. The recognition that once stirred within them begins resurfacing with greater clarity. They remember the calm confidence you carried, the absence of manipulation in your words, the way your presence never demanded admiration, yet naturally commanded respect. What they once interpreted as threat now appears as something rare and valuable. Gradually, they begin understanding that the fear guiding their earlier decisions had not been protecting them. It had been limiting them. By choosing comfort over truth, they had aligned themselves with a relationship that required constant performance and maintenance. The alliance that once seemed convenient now feels like a structure built on insecurity rather than genuine connection. Chosen one, this awakening does not happen all at once. It unfolds through moments of reflection that gradually change how they see their past actions. They begin acknowledging that what they once dismissed about you was actually a reflection of their own hesitation to face something real. Instead of recognizing authenticity when it appeared, they allowed fear to convince them that authenticity was dangerous. As this understanding deepens, the image they hold of you begins transforming. You are no longer seen through the lens of the narrative that once surrounded your name. Instead, you appear as a reminder of the choice they once avoided. The choice between living comfortably within familiar patterns or stepping towards something genuine that might have changed their life. Chosen one. While this realization unfolds within them, something equally important is happening within you. The season of sabotage and confusion that once surrounded your life has begun losing its influence. For a long time, you waited for understanding, hoping that the people around you might eventually recognize the truth of who you were. Yet the journey you have walked has gradually shifted your perspective. You no longer depend on validation from those who once doubted or misunderstood you. The clarity you gained through prayer, endurance, and discernment has established your worth far more firmly than any external approval ever could. The experiences that once caused you to question yourself now stand as evidence of your resilience. Chosen one. As heaven restores clarity around your life, the interference that once slowed your progress begins fading away. The relationships that carried hidden agendas lose their power over your decisions. The environments where manipulation once influenced your opportunities no longer determine your direction. Instead, a sense of momentum returns, guided not by the opinions of others, but by the alignment you have developed with God. Peace also returns to your spirit in a deeper way than before. The confusion that once clouded your mind gives way to quiet certainty. You begin recognizing that the sabotage you experienced did not diminish your calling. It revealed it. Every attempt to contain you forced you to grow stronger, wiser, and more discerning. Chosen one. What was meant to restrict your path has instead illuminated how unique your presence truly is. The resistance you faced exposed the difference between authenticity and performance, between genuine connection and manipulation. Instead of losing your place, you discovered how set apart you were all along. As this new season unfolds, your life begins shifting from hidden struggle toward visible elevation. Opportunities arise that align naturally with the character you developed through hardship. People who value sincerity rather than influence begin entering your environment. The qualities that once made you feel isolated now become the very reasons others recognize your value. This transformation carries a quiet but powerful message. God never left you during the season of sabotage. Even when you could not see the full picture, heaven was guiding your growth through every challenge. The delays that once frustrated you were shaping your readiness. The betrayals that once wounded you were sharpening your discernment. Chosen one, now you stand in a different place than where this story began. You are no longer defined by the confusion that surrounded you or the alliance that tried to limit your influence. Instead, you are defined by the strength, clarity, and authority that emerged through the battle. The story that once centered on hidden pain now begins revealing its final purpose. What was meant to diminish you has become the evidence of your elevation. And as you step forward into the next chapter of your life, the truth becomes unmistakable. The sabotage did not stop you. It revealed how firmly God had been guiding you all along. Chosen one, the conclusion of this story gathers every scattered moment of confusion, delay, and hidden resistance into a single, unmistakable revelation. Looking back now, you can see that you were never truly losing, even during the season when the sabotage seemed to be working. What appeared to be delay was actually refinement. The doors that closed without explanation were not always rejection, but protection. The opportunities that passed you by were not evidence that your value had been overlooked. They were reminders that your life was not meant to be sustained by borrowed affection, unstable alliances, or recognition that depended on someone else's approval. The relationship that once worked quietly against you is now collapsing under the very weight of the deception that held it together. The second person, who built their sense of identity through proximity to borrowed power, begins losing the influence they once relied on. Without the illusion to support them, their position weakens quickly. The first person, who once carried status and influence, now faces a painful clarity about the choices they allowed, the manipulation they ignored, and the truth they once avoided. Their realization may be sincere, but it arrives far too late to determine your worth. Your worth was established long before any recognition from them. Chosen one, you now stand on the other side of that interference, clear, whole, and spiritually grounded. The confusion that once surrounded your path has lifted. You no longer carry questions about why certain doors closed or why certain relationships fractured. You no longer shrink your presence or apologize for the growth that once unsettled others. The system that tried to contain you has collapsed, and the signal that was once buried is rising again. Yet the greatest victory is not that someone finally understands your value. The true victory is that you remained faithful to who you were, even when the illusion around you tried to rewrite your story. Because you held on to that authenticity long enough, the entire structure built against you eventually fell apart. Now the path before you is no longer about survival. It is about sacred expansion.